Good morning. Tomorrow is October 12th. As a child, we celebrated it as Columbus Day. Many of us have learned a poem. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. We were told he discovered America, even though he never set foot in North America. I had a childhood friend, Gary, who was of Norwegian descent, who always liked to remind us that Leif Erikson came to North America in around 1000 A.D. And we both overlooked the fact that America already was occupied, discovered, and had been by Native Americans for 10 to 15,000 years. Here's what Columbus wrote about the people he discovered on the island of Hispaniola, which has the Dominican Republic and Haiti on it currently. He wrote, "Your Highness may believe that this island and all the others are as much as yours as Castile. Here there is only wanting a settlement and the order to the people to do what is required. For I, with the force I have under me, which is not large, could march all over these islands without opposition. I have seen only 3 sailors land without wishing to do harm, and a multitude of Indians fled before them. They have no arms, they are without warlike instincts, they all go naked and are so timid that 1,000 would not stand before 3 of our men. So they are good to be ordered about, to work and sow, and to do all that may be necessary to build towns. And they should be taught to go about clothed and to adopt our customs." According to a 2019 NPR report by Lila Fadel, there's no comprehensive list of people that have switched, but at least 10 states now celebrate some version of Indigenous Peoples Day on the second Monday of October. Like Hawaii's Discoverers Day or South America's Native America's Days, and many college campuses have dumped Columbus Day for Indigenous Peoples Day, as have more than 100 cities, towns, and countries and counties across the country. So we're in the middle of revisionist history, and history needs to be revised, not because we want to say that America is a bad country, but the United States, just like a person, in order to improve, must reckon with mistakes that we have made in our past. Otherwise, they come back and haunt us in sideways ways. We need to be clear about who we have been in order for us to become better. One thing that we need to remember is that Native Americans were nations. They were here. They were civilizations, like in Europe. The Mississippian culture first appeared around 1000 in the Common Era, following the development out of less agriculturally intensive and less centralized woodland period. The largest urban site of these people, Cahokia, located near modern East St. Louis, may have reached a population of 20,000. Other chiefdoms were constructed throughout the southeast, and there was trade networks that went from the Gulf of Mexico to the Great Lakes. And in the western United States, about the same time, in the Mesa Verde region, from AD 1200 to 1250, more than 20,000 people were there. And 20,000 doesn't sound like a lot of people. But in 1200 AD, that was the population of London. Rome had only 50,000. The great civilizations were farther east, like Baghdad, which had 250,000 people, and China, our population leader for a long time, already had Kafeng, China, which had a population of 1 million, way back in the year 1200. And there were other civilizations in North America and South America that were also large and perfectly in sync with the rest of the world. In the first millennium, Teotihuacan, which is in the place where Mexico City is, was the largest city, with a population estimated at 125,000, making it at least the 6th largest city in the world during that first period of the millennium. And then about the time of Columbus, the Inca civilization dominated the Andes region. From 1438 to 1533, Inca rule extended nearly 100 linguistic or ethnic communities, some 9 to 14 million people connected by 40,000 kilometers of road. So what made it possible for us to just consider that these were wild places? Well, the Roman Catholic Church decided that anywhere that wasn't Christian was wild. In the papal bull Dum Diversas in 1452, Pope Nicholas said that they could reduce any Saracens, which were the name for Muslims, and pagans, or any other unbelievers, to perpetual slavery. And this facilitated the Portuguese slave trade in West Africa. In 1493, there was a Spanish Pope, Alexander VI, and he wanted to make sure that the Spanish got in some of this action, and so there was a line of demarcation set in what he thought was the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, although it did catch the tip of Brazil, which is why Brazil speaks Portuguese, and the rest of Latin America speaks Spanish. And that division gave Spain almost all the rights to America, and Portugal the rights to Africa and India. Now, up in England, they had broken away from the Roman Catholic Church, mostly over the marriages of King Henry the VIII. But he wanted to get involved in this land grab. And so, in 1496, he indicated his official royal support to John Cabot and his sons as agents of the English crown. And Cabot was empowered to investigate, claim, and possess lands which before this time were unknown to all Christians. So he says, if the Spanish and the Portuguese haven't gotten there first, it's England's. In 1497, Cabot landed on what is now Canada and claimed it for England. He died on a return voyage in 1500, but his son, Sebastian Cabot, returned to Newfoundland in 1504, and in 1508 he traveled as far south as Chesapeake Bay. As the United States separated from Great Britain, they still maintained this doctrine of discovery. In the Supreme Court case in 1823, Johnson versus McIntosh, said the different nations of Europe asserted the ultimate dominion to be in themselves over the land, and claimed and exercised as a consequence of this ultimate dominion a power to grant the soil while yet in possession of the natives. Basically, it is ours to grant to whoever we want. And we think, well, this is the olden times. We certainly have improved a lot, and we have improved some. But this doctrine was cited as recently as 2005. The Oneida Nation in New York purchased land that was not on their reservation and wanted to add it to their sovereign land. And this was denied. Justice Ginsburg delivered the opinion of the court. The separate parcels of land in question, once contained within the Oneida's 300,000 acre reservation, were last possessed by the Oneidas as a tribal entity in 1805. For 2 centuries, the governance of the area which the properties are located has been provided by the state of New York and its county and municipal units. We hold that the tribe cannot unilaterally revive its ancient sovereignty in whole or in part over the parcels at issue. The Oneidas long ago relinquished the reins of government and cannot regain them through open market purchase. Under the doctrine of discovery, fee title to the lands occupied by Indians when the colonists arrived became vested in the sovereign, first the discovering European nation, and later the original states of the United States. Now, these type of decisions are not unique to the USA. This has been a problem all over the world. That as nations grow and get organized, they move into territories that they claim for their own, but historically they haven't necessarily been their own. And this led in 2007 for the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. And a resolution was adopted in 2007. It's a long resolution. It has 46 articles in it. But I think it's best summarized by Article 3. Indigenous people have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. In light of these issues, the UUs passed a resolution to repudiate the doctrine of discovery and implement the UN Declaration of Rights. It was proposed in 2011 and passed in 2012. And it reads, whereas we, the Unitarian Universalists, along with the U.S. government and society at large, must all acknowledge that federal Indian law and modern-day treatment of tribes and Indians is based on centuries-old doctrine of discovery. And as the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People was overwhelmingly adopted by the General Assembly, without conditions or qualifications, after more than 20 years of discussions and deliberations by thousands of indigenous nations, governments, organizations, and people from around the world. Therefore, be it resolved that we as Unitarian Universalist congregations repudiate the doctrine of discovery as a relic of colonialism, feudalism, and of religious and cultural and racist bias, having no place in the modern-day treatment of American Indians. So what are we as a people of faith called to do? The first thing is to recognize the inherent worth and dignity of all people. We must remember that Native Americans are alive now. They are not an extinguished people. They have adapted to the oppression that has occurred over these centuries, but they still exist as a people. By the latest census data, 3 million are registered members of indigenous nations, and another 2 million list heritage. The largest nation in North Carolina are the Lumbee, with over 55,000 members. They are recognized by the state, but not by the U.S. government. They live primarily in Robeson, Scotland, Hoke, and Cumberland counties, where they are about 50% of the population. And their struggles are current and real. One of the things that is applied by the government to say, are you a nation, is the racial purity tests, which is a problem for the Lumbees because over the years, they as a community have accepted people who have come from other tribes. When the Peep settlers of New Bern chased out the Tuscarora people, most of them went up north, but some of them went southwest and stayed with the Lumbees. When slaves escaped, many of them went to the Lumbee nation and found refuge. And so these are people who are an amalgamation under pure racial terms, but they are Native American because they have upheld their particular nation's tradition of welcoming the stranger. There's even rumors that the lost colony may have gone to them. Who knows? So there's all this definition that we impose on people and saying, we get to decide whether you are Indian or not. But the Native Americans have won some victories in recent years. The oil pipeline at Standing Rock has been ordered to have a new environmental study by the EPA, although they weren't able to stop continued construction. That was reversed under the current Justice Department. And then there's a new ruling in Oklahoma, which we're not quite sure what it means, but it returned much of the sovereignty of Oklahoma to many of the tribes and nations that live there. And it all came up with questions about who has the right to arrest who. And so now there's a lot of white people living on land that the government said, we never really had a treaty to say that the land was ours. And that's going to go on in the courts for years, I'm sure. But the struggles continue. The COVID-19 crisis hit the Navajo Nation particularly hard. Inequity in the healthcare systems has resulted in over 100,000 cases and 500 deaths. In the Dakotas, voting rights are being suppressed. There were proposals that in order to vote, you had to have a physical address with a number. But some of the communities in Native American nations don't use the American postal system as how they deliver the mail. And so people don't have physical addresses. And so it was just an attempt to say, well, we're not going to let the Indians vote. But it's made to disguise to look like it's just, they have to put down their address. What's wrong with that? And one of the most troubling things that's going on is that currently tribal courts do not have the jurisdiction to prosecute non-tribal members for crimes like sexual assault and rape, even if they occur on tribal land. This is a huge issue because non-Native American men commit the majority of assaults against Native women. 56% of Native women in a recent survey reported being sexually assaulted, and 90% of the perpetrators were white men. So this is basically rapists going onto the reservation and raping somebody, coming back to white land and saying, you can't prosecute us. Voting rights, women's rights, environmental rights, and health care are universal concerns. We need to realize that our liberties are linked to the liberties of this nation's first people. In the tide of rising fascism in the Nazi Germany, Martin Niemöller wrote a poem that I'm reciting from memory, so I'm sure it's going to be inaccurate, but it was first they came for the gypsies, but I was not a gypsy and I wasn't concerned. They came for the Jews and I wasn't concerned. They came for the homosexuals and I wasn't a homosexual and I wasn't concerned. And then they came for me and there was nobody left to stand up for me. And so we see the people in the margins in this nation, minorities, immigrants, and our first peoples, being told they're not really American and they can't participate in the vision of America that some racists have. And we need to be aware of this, because when they come for us, we want to know that we have built coalitions with a lot of people so that they were stopped in their tracks. Dina Gilio Whitaker and Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz wrote a book entitled All the Real Indians Died Off, and 20 Other Myths About Native Americans. And Ortiz also has another book about the indigenous history of the United States, which is modeled on Howard Zinn's famous book of the People's History of the U.S. And it's this realization that history has been whitewashed. And we need to remove that veil and learn the truth. And then once knowing the truth, we can come together as a people and make this nation more valuable and more free and more open for all people. Gilio Whitaker said, Indian issues are becoming everyone's issues because it is about the environment. It is about environmental justice. It is about clean water, which everyone can relate to now. We, as UUs, need to reckon with our own past. As we approach Thanksgiving, we need to know that the story is not as rosy as it is told. We're taught about the friendly Indian Squanto. Well, he knew English because the English traders since Cabot had been coming to the New England area and kidnapping Native Americans as slaves for years before the Pilgrims ever arrived trying to make a settlement. And then after the shared meal, war broke out and many natives were killed. The first parish of Plymouth is the oldest UU congregation. Its founding date was 1620. They were not Unitarian Universalists when they arrived, but the subsequent generations liberalized their faith. And being a liberal doesn't save Unitarian Universalists. Many Unitarian Universalists were Indian agents in the West and robbed Indian people of their culture. Now, it was the liberal position of the day because a lot of people said, let's just kill them. And the Unitarians said, well, let's re-educate them. And so it was better than killing, but it was harmful. It was painful, and the repercussions of that still exist. The past is not past. It still lives today. And that is why we have to tell history today in a way that includes all people. And it's up to us to recognize the rights of others as we strive to make a better world. May we bless and be blessed. Please now prepare yourself to sing When Our Heart is in a Holy Place, led by Beth Ann Jacobson, accompanied by Judy Harrison on piano.